Hi, I'm Shane Wagner, lead engineer and owner at ProRIGID. We're here today in our research and development facility, and today we're going to talk about sway bar end links. In order to talk about them, the first thing we're going to talk about is what is the purpose of a sway bar end link. What's it do? The biggest thing that an end link does is it transfers the load generated by the sway bar to the chassis. One end is connected to the sway bar, the other end to the chassis. As the sway bar twists, it generates a load, and an end link's got to be able to withstand that. The second thing it needs to do is as the sway bar twists, the end link needs to be able to rotate. And the third thing that it needs to do is it needs to articulate in instances where the end link is attached to the strut on a front steer situation, like on the new Camaro. So it'll need to be able to turn like this. And this is very important because if it doesn't have that articulation, it's going to bind up, you're going to lose steering and get kind of a hairy situation. So we're going to cut to the car and I'm going to show you just how that works. Okay, here we are underneath the car and we're showing the end link attached to the sway bar and attached to the strut. Right now we're at full chock to the right, and this is something you're going to want to check on your vehicle as well if you have aftermarket end links to make sure that they're sufficient. One way to do that is put the key in the ignition, let the steering wheel unlock, and just go ahead and rotate it. As you can see, the end link rotates with the steering. You're going to want to go both ways. And once you have it at full chock, we're going to come back around the other way here so you can get a good sight of that. You're going to want to be able to grab up in here. You should still have some play left over in your end link. If you don't, that means you're binding it up and you don't have enough play. This is something that we have taken very seriously and taken the GM prints and specifications to go ahead and design that into the end link. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is what is the purpose of an adjustable end link. The very first thing that you want to look at is on lower vehicles. A lot of times you will see the sway bar come at an acute angle with the end link. You're going to want to be able to adjust that out because you always want your end link to be at 90 degrees to your sway bar to be the most effective. Another situation that would occur when that would happen is when you have multiple holes in your sway bar, and a lot of aftermarket sway bars. If you have a hole over here, it'll also create an acute angle. You're going to want to take that out of it. Another reason to have an adjustable end link is situations where you want to remove preload. If you have different corner weights, different suspension setups, you're going to have one side that might be a little bit tighter than the other. You're going to want one end link to go in smoothly without having to try to pull the bar. So you might have different adjustments on both sides for the end links. And also tracks that have predominant right or left hand turns, you might want to play with preload as well. Next thing we're going to talk about is what are the problems with the OEM end links. The first thing is obvious, they're not adjustable. So all those things that I just talked about you won't be able to do. The second thing is the factory end links are very spindly. This is an example of a factory front end link. As you can see, very small, and a lot of our stress analysis has shown that this will bend with a higher rate sway bar because they're not made to withstand those type of loads. This is actually one that we took off of our vehicle with stock suspension. We did a lot of autocross, and we actually do have a slight bend in this as well. So that's something I would definitely recommend upgrading. Okay, now that we know how sway bar end links function and what their main purpose is, we're going to talk about ProRIGID's ProRIGID end links. First, I'd like to say that all our components are CAD designed. We use GM drawings, as you can see here. We have testing procedures that they use for testing their end links, their sway bars, the maximum and minimum angles required for that misalignment that we talked about earlier. These are all things that we take very seriously. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into our ProRIGID end links and talk a little bit about all the key features. Here you can see a comparison of our end link versus the factory end link, both the front and the rear. You can see the main difference is how spindly they are. They're not adjustable. There's a lot of key features here we're going to get right into. The very first thing I want to talk about is the rod ends. We use a very high misalignment rod end that are custom made and forged just for us. They're made from a 4340 chromoly. They're injected with Teflon Kevlar, as you can see on the inside here, so that they have a noise-free operation. They got a chrome-plated 51-200 steel ball, large 12mm shafts, and then they're mil-spec notched keywayed for our misalignment washers, which I'll show you here. I'll take one apart. You can see the keyway notch right here, and that's for our mil-spec keyway washer, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Next thing is we have these special made studs. They're also made out of chromoly. They're heat treated, gold zinc plated to prevent corrosion. You can see the high misalignment that they allow. Now these are swedged in, and that's a little bit better than a through bolt because there is no allowance for the slop of the bolt inside the ball. Now the nuts, we also had special made. These are actually a patent design from Yamaha. Unlike a nylock nut, they have a spring washer on the inside for the locking mechanism. And that's not going to be affected by heat, and then the vibration resistance is a lot higher than a nylock nut, and they are reusable. A nylock nut will eventually wear out the more times you take it on and off. All our systems come with 2 washers, one for the inside and the outside. They're a machine steel washer, very thick, and that's to distribute the load on both sides so you ain't wobbling out the hole as you're putting pressure onto the sway bar or onto the chassis. Next thing I'll show you is this keyway washer. As you can see, it's got 2 nubs on it. It's got a keyway, and it's got a safety wire loop. These are stamped specifically for us. They are a military spec washer used in the aerospace, and that's to prevent the rod end from rotating from a certain position. Because as you can see, the factory units, these are orientated 90 degrees apart. Now if you just have an adjuster shaft on there, you can get those a little bit off, and then you will lose some misalignment. Which would be very bad, as you saw earlier for the front suspension. It's because you're having to eyeball it. So that can be a big problem. So what this does, as you can see, the shaft has notches in it. So when you screw this down in there, so you can't tighten down the jam nut until those nubs actually go into that shaft. See, it's not allowing me until I get into one of those nubs, and now I can tighten down the jam nut. But securing it in place, preventing it from going anywhere from that position. The next thing I'll show you are the nuts, the jam nuts themselves. We also had these custom machined just for this application. They are machined out of chromoly steel, gold zinc plated again for corrosion, and they also are drilled for safety wire. So that safety wire can go through there and onto the safety loop onto this keyway washer. This is an example here of one that's been safety wired. See how that goes onto the loop and through the nut. And that prevents that nut from loosening once you have it set. Now, the next thing I'll talk about is the actual adjuster shaft itself. The adjuster shaft is machined from 7075 T6 aluminum. They're gun drilled all the way through. They're left and right hand thread, so they're on-car adjustable. Then they're shop peened. And what that does is it gives it a little bit longer fatigue life by cold working the surface. You can see that it's very smooth and has no stress risers whatsoever. And then they're all ball peen milled. Take weight out wherever we could. And then they're finished off with type 3 hard anodized in red. and they're all assembled together. And that's basically the ProRIGID end links. These are the fronts, and these are the rears. A couple things to look for in other people's rod end designs that you want to be cautious about. The very first thing you want to look for is misalignment in the rod ends. A lot of the rod ends that people are providing don't provide enough misalignment. They have a bolt going through the rod end. It's not providing enough misalignment, or it's not a big enough ball on the rod end. Also check that, and I showed you a way to do that. The second thing is the orientation. A lot of these end links may be adjustable, but as I showed you, if you don't have the keyway washers, you might get the misalignment off just a little bit, and that can be very critical, especially on the situation where it's attached to the strut on the front of the car. The next thing to look for is the washers and the distribution of the load. If you don't have a thick, large washer on both sides, you're applying all that load right through that hole, and you're not distributing the load, and you could wobble it out. The other thing is low quality rod ends. I showed you that our rod ends are very high quality, chromoly 4340 steel with a Teflon liner, so a noise-free operation. There's no jiggle in the ball, so check for that as well. Some of these sway bar end links, you have to drill the sway bar, drill the mounts in order to mount them. They might have a little bit bigger stud or a bigger bolt. We use the standard factory 10mm bolts, so there's no drilling involved. They're just plug and play. Then the nylon nuts, I talked about them a little bit. Nylon nuts are nice for one-time use. As soon as you take them apart, re-screw them on, they're going to get weaker and weaker, and they're going to start losing that ability to prevent from rattling off. Ours use the stamped steel U-nut, which does not allow that whatsoever. And then the last thing is the rod ends. Our rod ends are not only just custom made for us with the keyways in them and things like that, but they're custom made to length. So the rear rod ends, for example, are a lot shorter than a standard off-the-shelf rod end. And what that does, it allows you to get the right length from the factory and have adjustment there. A lot of the off-the-shelf end links won't allow you to do that because they're too long, and then you don't have the right size adjuster as well. So overall, that's our summary of our ProRIGID end links. Go ahead, check them out online, and hopefully we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks.